Hi everyone, so welcome to Computer Programming 11B, and today I will be discussing to you this first lesson, which is how to use methods, classes, and objects in Java programming. So before anything else, here are the following topics we will be learning for this chapter. So we will be learning about method class and placements. We will be identifying those parts of a method and adding some parameters to those methods, and as well as how to create those methods that can actually return values. We will also be learning about classes and objects, and as well as creating a class and the instance methods inside the class. We will also be declaring objects and use their methods and create constructors. And also, we'll be appreciating classes as data types. So first of all, we have to understand first what is a method calls and a placement. Now, when we say method in Java programming, it's actually a program module that contains a series of statements that carry out a task. Now, a program's main method can execute additional methods, and those methods can execute the others. And also, any class can contain an unlimited number of methods, which you have to remember, and each of those methods can be called an unlimited number of times. Now I'll be showing to you how to at least create a method later on, and we'll be showing you some more examples on how methods can be used in your program. So to execute a method, you have to invoke or call it. Now, we all know that in a Java program, for it to actually work or for it to actually run properly, you should have a main method, right? Now, inside the main method, it is actually where all of your programs, your algorithms will be placed in order for your program to be executed. So, in other words, calling method makes a method call, and the method call invokes what we call a called method. So it's actually called what we call the client method, because a called, or should I say, because a called method provides a service for its client. Now, let's take a look at this example here. So you have your class, which actually named as first, and inside the class is what we call the main method. Now, inside the main method are the following print lines: the XYZ companies, 8900 US Highway 14, and so on. Now, instead of adding the three different print lines here to the application, you might want to consider calling a particular method that executes the following statements. Now, let's take a look at this example here. There you go. So the shaded line contains the call to this displayAddress method. Now, our purpose here is actually to convert this main method into something, or by adding another method that we can call inside the main method, and convert the four print lines into a single print lines that will be called out from the method itself. So from here, take a look at this example that I have shown you. So you have a main method, and take note, we have here what we call the display address. Now, in Java programming, a method is actually, or in order for you to identify a method, it looks something like that. So you have the method name and the parenthesis and a semicolon. This simply means the display address method will be called out later on in your program. Now, we also have to know, okay, that it's actually more important that a method is easily reusable. So after you create the display address method, you can use it in any application that needs a company's name and address. So in other words, you do the work once and then you can use the method many times. So once again, to reiterate, you can use methods anytime you like in your program. So besides adding a call to the method in the first class, you must actually write the method. So you have to place a method within a class. So just like what we have seen earlier, so you have here the public class first, followed by the main method. Now you can, main method is an example of a method, okay? So inside the main method you can add another method, but it must be outside of any other methods as well. What does it mean? Later on I'll be showing you some more examples. So in other words, you cannot place a method within another method. Now let's take a look at this one. So you have the public class, you have the main string, okay? Now inside the main method, the main method, you have called the displayAddress method in a system.out.println. So now adding methods in your program, you can actually place those methods or additional methods before, take note, before the main method itself and after the main method. You have to remember that you can actually add many methods as you want. Okay? So it shows the two locations where you can place additional methods within the first class within the curly braces of the class. But outside of either before or after any other methods can never overlap. Okay, now let's take a look at this example. Once again, we have here the public class named first, the main method, okay? So in this class, it contains two different statements. The first one is a call to the displayAddress method. So this is a displayAddress method. Now, it was actually called before printing out the first Java application. So that means once you executed this program, it will first read what is inside your main method. That's a rule. That's a rule of thumb, right? So the first line that it will read is not this one, the first Java application, but rather the displayAddress application, this one. So displayAddress now will be called. That means this method here, this entire block will be called. And that simply signifies that the displayAddress methods have the following statements inside of it. So if you executed that one, since it called first the displayAddress, that means it printed out XYZ Company, 8900 US Highway, Crystal Lake, Illinois, 614. And after the 3 system.out.println here, that's the time that the first Java application was printed out. You got it? So I hope you are actually having or getting the idea of what is a method. So we have to have an understanding on what we call the method construction. So it must include two different parts. First of all, the header. It provides those information, how other methods can interact with it. So it's what we called declaration. So we have header and we have what we call the body. So the method body, on the other hand, are simply those statements inside the curly braces. So it contains those different statements that can actually contain those algorithms that we will be placing. Okay, so it's called implementation. So header is what we call declaration, body is what we call implementation. So a method is not required to contain any statements in its body, but you usually would have no reason to create an empty method in a class. Well, that makes sense. First of all, what is the purpose of you creating a method? Well, probably some of you will actually say that the reason why you'll be creating a method, it's because you want your main method to look as more organized as possible. Instead of you placing those different statements inside the main method, you can actually put another method in order for you and the user itself to understand what's happening inside your code itself. So it's really out of sense for you to add a method that is blank, right? So sometimes while developing a program, the programmer creates an empty method as a placeholder and fills in the implementation later. So that's what we call the stub. Take note, that's what we call the stub. Some programmers, they can actually, or they consider adding a blank method for future purposes. Okay, now let's take a look here. This is the sample code earlier. Now for you to better understand the parts of the method, so once again, we have the main method, the class name, and the display address method that we have called or created here from the main method. So these two here, the public static void main, are what we call the method headers, and inside of that are what we call method bodies. So it contains the following. Maybe you're seeing the word public static void. We always use that. So first of all, we have an optional access specifier, a return type, and identifier, and of course a parenthesis. Now let's take a look. When we say access modifier, okay, it can be any of the following modifiers: public, private, and protected. So this is what we call the access modifiers and specifiers. This one. Okay. Now we also have here the static. The static modifier, okay, means that these methods do not require an object to be created. The public method, on the other hand, is a method in an application that must be specified. When we say public, that means it can be accessed publicly in all of those Java programs that we have. In the next chapters, we will be having some more deep understanding or deep knowledge on what is the purpose of having a public, private, and protected. Next is what we call the return type. So we have the public, which is what we call the access modifiers and specifiers. Next is what we call the return type. Return type describes the type of a data the method sends back to its calling method. What does it mean? That means the return type here, as you are seeing here, okay, this one is an example of a return type, void. Now, a method that returns no data, remember this, when you have created a method that will actually return nothing. When I say return nothing, that means once you call that method and it will not return anything, it just simply print it out. That's what we call the void. Okay? Because not all methods return a value. Here. So it doesn't send any information back to the method that calls it. That's void. Next is what we call the method name. And it can be any legal identifier, just like how we create public classes, just like how we create variables. It can be any legal identifiers. So that is like identifiers for classes and variables. A method's identifier must be one word with no embedded spaces. So it's like, declaring a variable. The method that executes first when you run an application must be named main method. That is always the first method. As I have said from the previous discussions before in CP11A, main method is where you will place all of your statements initially, because it will be the one that will be executed by Java itself. So, but you have a lot of leeway in naming other methods that you create. So it's basically it's your own discretion what names will you be giving to those method later on. So technically you could even name another method main as long as you did not include string within the parentheses, which will be discussed further. So methods do something and perform an action. Their names frequently contain a verb such as print or display, just like what we have seen here. the display address. So if you will be having or naming a method, it can, well, this is only an optional idea for everybody, but then you can always follow this one. You may want to add verb for you to easily identify what's the purpose of that method, what does it do, and anything. So parenthesis, every method header contains a set of parentheses that follow the identifier. So the parentheses might contain data to be sent to the method. For example, when you write the main method in a class, the parenthesis in its header surrounds string args. So if you have noticed, our main method, inside the main method inside the main method, we have there the string args, right? So the display address, on the other hand, method in the first class requires no outside data, so its parentheses are empty. So meaning it doesn't have any data, unlike the main method, which contains the string args method arguments methods. So we have here the main method. It contains string and an identifier args. Now args, by the way, can be modified, so you can use any words, any legal identifiers. Here, the display address with the parenthesis, you write might accept data within the parenthesis, but this one doesn't. So here, if you have called a method that named display address and you want to return something, that means the return type will not be void, because void is only empty. You are not returning anything. So if you would like to return a number, for example, your return type should be int, and inside this one should have an int x or int variable name. Okay, so the full name of the method or display address method is first dot display address. So first meaning that is the class name dot display address. So later on in this course, you will be learning how to create multiple Java programs now, and you will be calling different sets of methods. In most cases, you will be calling methods from other different Java classes. So you have to make sure to know how to do this later on. So do you have any questions? Alright, thank you so much for listening.